I'm Leah, 34 years old, the only daughter of a renowned doctor, Dr. Margaret Fisher. Our relationship has always been complicated. I've spent my entire life trying to earn her approval, her acknowledgement. When I received an invitation to her retirement party after decades at a prestigious hospital, my emotions were mixed. I was happy to be included but anxious about seeing her after our time apart. Before I share what happened at that heartbreaking ceremony, let me know where you're watching from and hit subscribe if you've ever felt undervalued by your own family. Growing up as the daughter of Dr. Margaret Fisher wasn't easy. My mother wasn't just any doctor. She was one of the most respected cardiac surgeons in Boston. Her name was spoken with reverence in medical circles, and her research was published in journals that my childhood friends couldn't even pronounce. While other kids had mothers who attended school plays and baked cookies, I had a mother whose face appeared in medical textbooks. Our family home was a sprawling colonial in Brookline's most prestigious neighborhood. It was beautiful, spacious, and often felt empty despite the constant presence of our housekeeper, Mrs. Sullivan. She was the one who made my lunches, checked my homework, and tucked me in at night. My mother was usually at the hospital saving lives that apparently mattered more than being present for her only child. I still remember my 8th birthday party. Mrs. Sullivan had arranged everything: decorations, cake, games for my friends. I kept looking at the door, hoping my mother would surprise me by coming home early. She had promised she would try. The party ended, friends left, and Mrs. Sullivan helped me blow out candles on a cake my mother never saw. She called around midnight apologizing about an emergency surgery. It wasn't the first promise broken, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. The house would occasionally fill with people for my mother's dinner parties. Important doctors, hospital administrators, and research partners would flood our dining room sipping expensive wine and discussing medical breakthroughs. During these events, my mother would briefly acknowledge my existence, placing her hand on my shoulder and introducing me. "This is Leah, my daughter. She's doing quite well in school." It felt like I was being presented as an accomplishment, a line on her resume, rather than a person she loved. Throughout elementary school and into high school, I threw myself into academics. I wasn't naturally gifted like my mother, but I compensated with determination. I studied until my eyes burned, stayed up, reviewing flashcards when friends were at parties, and volunteered at science camps during summers. All in pursuit of one thing: my mother's approval. When I graduated as valedictorian of my high school, I thought finally she would show pride in me. She attended the ceremony, sitting stiffly in the back row, checking her pager every few minutes. During my speech, I glanced at her seat, hoping to see her smiling. Instead, I found her texting, presumably to the hospital. She left immediately after the ceremony, citing a consultation she couldn't miss. There was no celebration dinner, no words of pride. Despite my genuine interest in art and design, I enrolled in pre-med courses at Boston University. It wasn't what I wanted, but I thought sharing her field would bring us closer. The coursework was grueling for someone whose passion lay elsewhere. While I could memorize anatomical terms and chemical formulas, I didn't have the natural intuition for medicine that my mother possessed. Still, I pushed through 2 years of biology, chemistry, and physics, earning respectable grades that never seemed quite good enough. College graduation day came with a particular sting. I had invited my mother months in advance, confirmed multiple times, only to receive a text message 3 hours before the ceremony. "Emergency bypass surgery. Can't make it. Congratulations." No explanation, no apology, just those cold words on my phone screen. That night, surrounded by friends and their beaming parents, I made a decision that would change the course of my relationship with my mother forever. The following week, I walked into her home office where she was reviewing medical journals. With shaking hands but steady voice, I told her I was switching my major to graphic design. Her reaction was worse than anger. It was dismissal. She looked at me with something between pity and disgust. "So you're giving up," she said, not as a question, but a statement of fact. "Do you know how many people would kill for the opportunities you've had? The Patel's daughter just got accepted to Johns Hopkins Medical School." The Goldman son is doing groundbreaking research in neuroscience, and my daughter wants to draw pictures for a living. I tried explaining that design was more than drawing pictures, that I had talent, passion, and could build a successful career. She didn't hear me. Instead, she launched into stories of sacrifices she had made, how she'd worked twice as hard as her male colleagues to earn her position, how disappointment was the price of raising a child while pursuing excellence. The conversation ended with her signature move, a glance at her watch and a statement about needing to review patient files. The gulf between us widened that day, and over the next several years it became an ocean. Our communication dwindled to holiday calls and obligatory birthday messages. Each interaction was strained perfunctory, as if we were distant acquaintances rather than mother and daughter. By the time I was 30, I had given up on the idea that my mother would ever truly see me. 10 years passed since that confrontation in her office. I built a life for myself in Chicago, far from the constant shadow of my mother's reputation in Boston. My career in graphic design flourished beyond what even I had imagined possible. I started with a position at a small agency, worked my way up, and eventually launched my own studio specializing in branding for tech startups. My work had been featured in design magazines, and I had recently won an industry award for a campaign I created for a sustainable energy company. My studio occupied a bright corner space in an old factory building in Chicago's West Loop. The exposed brick walls displayed framed examples of my best work, and large windows flooded the room with natural light. It was everything I had envisioned when I changed my major all those years ago: creative, fulfilling, and entirely mine. Nothing like the sterile hospital offices where my mother had spent her career. My personal life had finally found stability, too. I had been dating James for 2 years, a software engineer with kind eyes and a patience I'd never experienced in previous relationships. He understood my complicated family history without judgment and supported my career with genuine enthusiasm. Unlike my mother, he came to every gallery showing and client launch party proudly introducing himself as Leah's boyfriend to anyone who would listen. I had also cultivated a close circle of friends who had become the family I chose. Weekly dinners with my friend group, weekend trips to Michigan's lakeshore, and holiday gatherings that were warm and genuine, these people filled the emotional spaces my biological family had left empty. They celebrated my successes without qualification and supported me through disappointments without making them feel like failures. It was on an ordinary Tuesday in April when the envelope arrived. The studio mail usually consisted of design magazines, vendor catalogs, and the occasional handwritten thank you note from a satisfied client. This was different. Heavy cream stationery with the embossed logo of Boston Memorial Hospital in the corner. I recognized it immediately as my mother's workplace for the past 35 years. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, half expecting some form letter announcing a hospital fundraiser. Instead, I found an elegant invitation. Boston Memorial Hospital cordially invites you to a retirement celebration honoring the distinguished career of Dr. Margaret Fisher, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery, for her 35 years of exceptional service and groundbreaking contributions to the field. The date was set for 3 weeks later. At the bottom in smaller print, please RSVP by April 20th. Note, seating is arranged by priority status. I sat at my desk staring at the invitation for what must have been 20 minutes. A storm of emotions swirled inside me. Surprise at being included at all, curiosity about who had made sure I received an invitation, anxiety about facing my mother and her colleagues after so long, and a small, stubborn spark of hope that perhaps this signaled a desire for reconciliation. That evening, I showed the invitation to James over dinner at our favorite neighborhood bistro. The small candle between us flickered, casting dancing shadows across his thoughtful face as he considered what this might mean. "Are you going to go?" he asked, reaching across the table to hold my hand. "I don't know," I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it completely. Why should I fly across the country to sit in a room full of people who always came before me in her priorities? But another part. Wants closure, James finished for me. Or maybe a new beginning. Is that naive? I asked. He shook his head. It's human. And whatever you decide, I'm here. I could even come with you if you want. I considered his offer but ultimately declined. This was a journey I needed to make alone, a confrontation with my past that required my full emotional attention without worrying about how James might perceive my mother or the medical community that had always made me feel inadequate. Over the next few days, I found myself doing something that surprised me, shopping for the perfect outfit for the event. I settled on a sophisticated navy blue dress from a boutique on Michigan Avenue. It was professional, yet stylish, exactly the kind of thing a successful creative professional would wear. Part of me recognized the childish desire to impress, to show my mother and her colleagues that I had become someone worthy of respect, despite taking a different path. I also spent considerable time selecting a gift. It needed to be perfect, personal, yet not overly sentimental, expensive enough to indicate success, but not ostentatious. After much deliberation, I chose a Cartier watch, classic and elegant. I had it engraved with a simple message, "To new beginnings. Congratulations, Mom. Love, Leah." The RSVP was sent, flights booked, and a hotel room reserved at the Four Seasons. I deliberately chose a hotel rather than asking to stay at my childhood home. The boundaries seemed important, a way of acknowledging that our relationship was now that of two adult women rather than mother and dependent child. As my departure date approached, anxiety intensified. I found myself rehearsing potential conversations with my mother, imagining scenarios ranging from tearful reconciliations to cold dismissals. James noticed my preoccupation and did his best to keep me grounded, reminding me that whatever happened, I would return to a life and career I had built on my own terms. The night before my flight, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake in our apartment, listening to James's steady breathing beside me, watching the digital clock tick through the small hours. By the time I boarded the plane the next morning, I felt simultaneously exhausted and wired, like I'd consumed too much caffeine on an empty stomach. Looking out the window as the plane descended into Boston Logan Airport, I watched the familiar skyline come into view. The city where I was born and raised now felt foreign, like a place I had only visited in dreams or seen in photographs. Yet as the wheels touched down, I felt the unmistakable sensation of coming home. Not to a place of comfort, but to a reckoning long overdue. The evening of my mother's retirement ceremony arrived with the kind of perfect spring weather Boston showcases in tourist brochures. Golden afternoon light bathed the imposing facade of Boston Memorial Hospital as I stepped out of my Uber. The main hospital entrance was adorned with elegant banners announcing the retirement celebration of Dr. Margaret Fisher. Seeing my mother's name and face displayed so prominently brought a confusing mix of pride and resentment. I smoothed the fabric of my navy dress, checked my reflection one last time in my compact mirror, and took a deep breath. The gift box containing the Cartier watch felt heavy in my hands, weighted not just by its physical presence, but by all it represented: Hope, olive branch proof of my success, despite her lack of faith in my chosen path. The hospital lobby had been transformed for the occasion. White flower arrangements created a pathway toward the grand ballroom, usually reserved for fundraising galas and medical conferences. Staff members I didn't recognize directed guests toward the event, their eyes lingering on me curiously, as if trying to place my face. I followed the flow of well-dressed attendees, mostly older physicians with their spouses, hospital administrators in expensive suits, and younger doctors who must have worked under my mother. Many greeted each other with the familiar ease of colleagues who had shared decades of professional life. I moved among them like a ghost, recognized by no one. As I approached the ballroom entrance, I spotted a face I actually knew. Dr. William Abernathy, one of my mother's oldest colleagues, an occasional dinner guest at our home during my childhood. His hair had gone completely white, but his booming laugh remained unchanged. "Dr. Abernathy," I said, approaching him. His eyes widened in recognition. "Leah Fisher, my goodness, look at you, all grown up and so elegant. Are you a doctor now too, following in your mother's footsteps?" The question stung despite its predictability. Actually, I own a design studio in Chicago. We specialize in branding and visual identity. Oh, that's creative, he replied, his enthusiasm noticeably dimmed. Your mother must be so surprised by your career choice. Before I could respond, he was pulled away by another colleague, leaving me alone again. His reaction was exactly what I had expected. The faint disappointment that I hadn't become a physician, the subtle implication that I had somehow failed to live up to the Fisher legacy. I continued into the ballroom foyer, where a registration table had been set up. Two young women in formal attire were checking names against guest lists and distributing name badges. The larger, more elegant badges were clearly for hospital staff and distinguished guests. I approached with a confident smile. Hello, I'm Leah Fisher, Dr. Margaret Fisher's daughter. The woman's polite smile didn't waver as she scanned her list. Fisher, I'm not seeing a Leah Fisher on our primary guest list. My confidence faltered. There must be some mistake. I received an invitation and RSVP'd weeks ago. She checked again, flipping pages with increasing discomfort. I'm sorry, Ms. Fisher. Let me check our secondary list. Secondary list. The words hung in the air between us. There was a hierarchy to the guest list, and I wasn't on the primary one. After a moment, she brightened. Ah, here you are, on our additional guest list. She reached under the table and produced a name tag different from the others, handwritten rather than printed on a simple white background rather than the hospital's elegant blue design. There seems to have been some confusion with the seating arrangements, she said, avoiding my eyes. Let me get someone from the events team to assist you. I stood awkwardly to the side, while guests continued to arrive, receiving their proper badges and proceeding into the main ballroom. After several minutes, a harried-looking young man approached me. Ms. Fisher, I'm Jason from events. There's been a slight situation with the seating. The main ballroom reached capacity with our priority guests, but we've arranged special accommodation for you. He led me not into the grand ballroom where I could now hear the buzz of conversation and soft classical music, but down a side hallway. With growing disbelief, I watched as he gestured to a single chair positioned near a service entrance facing a small monitor showing a live feed of the event inside. We've set up this private viewing area for you, he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. You'll be able to see everything on the screen, and servers will bring refreshments directly to you. I don't understand, I said, my voice tight with humiliation. Why am I sitting out here alone? Jason shifted uncomfortably. I'm just following the seating chart, ma'am. The directive from Dr. Fisher's office was clear. The ballroom seating is exclusively for colleagues, hospital board members, and special guests. Family members who couldn't be accommodated in the main room were given alternative arrangements. Family members, I repeated. How many family members are there that couldn't fit? I'm her only child. His discomfort visibly increased. I believe there are some cousins and an aunt also viewing from separate areas. I'm sorry, but those were the specific instructions we received. Dr. Fisher personally approved the final seating chart last week. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't an oversight or miscommunication. My mother had deliberately placed me here out of sight, away from her professional world. After receiving my RSVP, she had made the conscious decision to seat me in a hallway rather than in the room where she would be honored. Can I at least see her before the ceremony begins? I asked, hitting the pleading note in my voice. Fisher is in pre-event meetings with the hospital board and won't be available until she takes the stage, Jason replied, clearly eager to escape this uncomfortable interaction. There's a reception after the ceremony where you might be able to speak with her briefly. With that, he excused himself, leaving me alone with my single chair facing a monitor showing elegantly dressed people mingling in the ballroom I wasn't allowed to enter. The gift box felt unbearably heavy now. I placed it on the floor beside my chair and sat down back straight, willing myself not to cry. Through the service doors, I could hear laughter and conversation from the main event. Occasionally, staff would hurry past me, some offering sympathetic glances, others too busy to notice the woman sitting alone in the hallway. I pulled out my phone, half considering booking the next flight back to Chicago, when a server appeared with a glass of champagne and a small plate of hors d'oeuvres. "Compliments of the catering staff," she said with a kind smile that revealed she understood exactly how humiliating my situation was. "We thought you might like these." As the ceremony began on the small monitor, I sipped champagne in my hallway seat, watching as the hospital director welcomed everyone to celebrate my mother's illustrious career. The camera panned across tables of important guests, all focusing their attention on the stage where my mother would soon appear. I had never felt more invisible in my entire life. The isolation of that hallway seat cut deeper than any argument or missed milestone ever had. On the small monitor, I watched as hospital administrators and distinguished colleagues took turns praising my mother's contributions to medicine. The camera occasionally panned across the audience, showing tables of well-dressed people nodding appreciatively, raising glasses in toast, belonging in a way I never had. I sat perfectly still, back rigid against the uncomfortable chair, determined not to let any passing hospital staff see me cry. The champagne remained mostly untouched. Food on my small plate went uneaten. Every few minutes I checked my phone, sending brief updates to James, who responded with outrage and support in equal measure. "This is unbelievable," he texted. "You should leave. Come home. You don't deserve this." But some stubborn part of me refused to flee. I hadn't flown across the country to give up now. If nothing else, this experience would provide the closure I needed, irrefutable evidence that my mother's priorities would never include me. About 30 minutes into the ceremony, a different server approached, an older woman with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners. She refreshed my champagne and leaned in slightly. "Are you really Dr. Fisher's daughter?" she asked in a hushed tone. I nodded, not trusting my voice. She glanced around to ensure no one was listening. "I've worked hospital events for 15 years. This isn't right what they've done." "Did you know about the seating arrangements?" I asked. She nodded. "There was a lot of discussion in the catering department. We were told very specific instructions about the main ballroom. Only medical colleagues, hospital donors, and essential guests were permitted inside." "Essential guests," I repeated, the words bitter on my tongue. "If it helps, you're not the only one out here," she said. "There's a cousin in a similar setup down the east hallway. But," she hesitated. "But what? Dr. Westfield's family has a full table inside. His wife, children, even his mother. And Dr. Richardson brought her dog, a little Yorkie that's sitting on a cushion inside the ballroom." She shook her head. "I shouldn't be telling you this." "Thank you for being honest," I said. "It actually does help knowing it's not just standard protocol." She gave my arm a gentle squeeze before returning to her duties, leaving me with the crushing confirmation that my exclusion was intentional and exceptional. On the screen, the hospital director was introducing my mother. The camera angle changed to show her approaching the podium, resplendent in an elegant black evening gown, her silver hair styled perfectly. Despite everything, I felt a flicker of pride at how commanding she looked, every inch the pioneering female surgeon who had broken barriers in her field. Her speech began with practiced eloquence. She thanked the hospital board, acknowledged mentors who had guided her early career, and praised colleagues who had supported her research. She spoke of challenging cases that had pushed medical boundaries and young doctors she had trained who were now leaders in their own right. I listened intently, waiting for some mention of personal sacrifice, of balancing career and family, of her life outside the hospital walls. It never came. Instead, she said something that caused the small flame of hope I'd been nurturing to extinguish completely. "I've been fortunate in my career to have been unencumbered by the traditional demands that hold many women back. My complete dedication to medicine was possible because I arranged my life specifically to prioritize my patients above all else." Unencumbered. As if I had never existed. As if raising a child had been so minimal an experience it didn't even warrant acknowledgement in her career retrospective. The speech continued, but I barely heard it through the roaring in my ears. On screen, my mother was now thanking specific colleagues, mentioning personal anecdotes about working together. She even thanked her housekeeper of 30 years and the gardener who maintained her property. But not once did she mention having a daughter. When the applause finally erupted, I sat in stunned silence. The monitor showed my mother accepting a Crystal Award, smiling broadly as colleagues gave her a standing ovation. In that moment, watching her glory from my hallway exile, something shifted inside me. The hurt transformed into a clarity I had never before experienced. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and picked up the gift box. The hallway chair and small monitor, symbols of my lifetime of exclusion, seemed suddenly pathetic rather than hurtful. My mother hadn't simply failed to make room for me in that ballroom. She had failed to make room for me in her life. And that was her loss, not mine. With newfound resolve, I walked toward the main ballroom doors. No staff member tried to stop me as I pushed through, entering the space that had been deemed too important for the daughter of the woman being honored. Inside, guests were beginning to mingle as servers cleared the dinner plates. My mother stood at the center of a circle of admirers, award in hand, accepting congratulations. I moved toward her with purpose, the gift box held in front of me like a shield. As I approached, heads turned. Conversations paused. My mother's smile froze as she registered my presence where I shouldn't have been, in her carefully curated professional world. "Leah," she said, her voice betraying surprise and something like alarm. "I wasn't expecting you to come in here." "Clearly," I replied, my voice steady despite the thundering of my heart. "But I thought you might want your gift." I extended the box toward her. The circle of colleagues watched with curious expressions as she hesitantly took it. "Congratulations on your retirement, Mom," I said loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I'm Leah, Dr. Fisher's daughter. I was assigned seating in the hallway as I understand the chairs in here were reserved for important people." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. My mother's complexion paled slightly beneath her perfect makeup. She placed a hand on my arm, trying to guide me away from the group. "Leah, this isn't the time or place." "When would be the time or place?" I asked, not raising my voice, but not allowing myself to be hushed either. "I flew from Chicago to celebrate this milestone with you. I RSVP'd to the invitation, and you put me in a hallway with a TV screen." An older gentleman in the group, Dr. Samuel Goldstein, I recognized him from childhood, looked genuinely confused. "Margaret, you didn't tell us Leah was attending. We could have easily made room at the colleagues' table." My mother's discomfort was visible now. "Leah has her own life in Chicago. I didn't think she'd have interest in an event focused on medical achievements and hospital politics." "Yet I received an invitation," I countered, "and confirmed my attendance weeks ago." Another colleague, a woman around my mother's age, looked between us with dawning comprehension. "Margaret, are you saying you deliberately seated your own daughter in the hallway?" My mother's professional composure was slipping. The seating arrangements were complicated. Priority had to be given to hospital board members and colleagues who contributed directly to my work. "And Dr. Richardson's Yorkie," I asked, "did it contribute to your research too?" Uncomfortable silence fell over the group. My mother opened her mouth but seemed at a loss for words. Perhaps the first time in her career she found herself without a ready response. I hadn't come to create a scene or embarrass her. That had never been my intention. But standing there surrounded by people who had always taken precedence over me, I realized I deserved this moment of truth. Not for revenge, but for liberation. "Enjoy your retirement, Mom," I said quietly. "I hope it brings you everything you've worked for." Without waiting for her response, I turned and walked away head high, ignoring the whispers that followed me. As I pushed through the ballroom doors into the now empty hallway, I felt lighter than I had in years. The chair where I'd been seated looked small and insignificant now, just like the power my mother's approval had held over me for too long. Outside in the cool Boston evening, I took a deep breath of air that tasted like freedom. For the first time in my life, I had faced my mother on my own terms without seeking her validation or approval. Whatever happened next, I knew I would never again accept a seat in the hallway of anyone's life. The warm glow of streetlights illuminated my path, as I walked away from the hospital, each step carrying me further from the ballroom where my truth had finally been spoken. The spring air felt cleansing, filling my lungs with something that felt remarkably like relief. I had no destination in mind, simply allowing my feet to carry me through familiar Boston streets, while my thoughts settled into new patterns. I had only gone a few blocks when I heard someone calling my name. Turning, I saw an elegant woman with silver-streaked dark hair hurrying toward me, slightly breathless in her evening wear and heels. "Leah, please wait," she called. As she drew closer, I recognized Dr. Sarah Johnson, my mother's colleague and former medical school classmate. She had been a peripheral presence in my childhood, occasionally joining holiday dinners or appearing in photos with my mother from medical conferences. Unlike many of my mother's associates, Sarah had always made an effort to ask about my interests rather than just my academic achievements. "I'm glad I caught you," she said, catching her breath. "What happened in there wasn't right." I shrugged, surprising myself with how calm I felt. It was clarifying, if nothing else. "Would you join me for coffee or something stronger?" She gestured toward a small bistro across the street. "I think there are some things about your mother you should know." Curiosity overcame my desire to retreat to my hotel room. I nodded and we made our way to the bistro, an intimate space with soft jazz playing and the rich aroma of espresso in the air. We settled at a corner table, ordering a bottle of wine that Sarah insisted on. "I've known your mother for nearly 40 years, Sarah began after our wine was poured. "We were among the few women in our medical school class, and the only two who chose surgical specialties." I nodded, having heard variations of this story throughout my childhood, the pioneering women in medicine narrative that seemed to justify every missed recital and forgotten birthday. "What you might not know," Sarah continued, "is how different Margaret was before she became Dr. Fisher. She was passionate, yes, but also vulnerable, afraid of failure, terrified of not measuring up in a field dominated by men who were waiting for her to make a mistake." She took a sip of her wine before continuing. "When she found out she was pregnant with you, she was just completing her residency. The chief of surgery at the time told her outright that motherhood would be the end of her surgical career, that she could never compete with male surgeons if she divided her attention. So she chose her career," I said flatly. "I've made peace with that." Sarah shook her head. "It wasn't that simple. She tried in the beginning, but every time she left work for a school event, male colleagues would make comments. Every time she mentioned you, someone would question her commitment. Eventually, she built this wall between her personal and professional lives. She convinced herself it was protecting you both." "It didn't protect me," I said quietly. "No," Sarah agreed. "It damaged you. And her too, though she would never admit it." She leaned forward, her expression softening. "I'm not defending her choices, Leah. What she did tonight was inexcusable. But I want you to understand something. Your mother is terrified of retirement because medicine is the only identity she knows how to inhabit. And seeing you, successful, confident, building a career on your own terms, reminds her of everything she sacrificed unnecessarily." "You think she's jealous?" I asked, incredulous. "Not jealous," Sarah clarified. "Ashamed. She realizes too late that she could have been both a surgeon and a mother, that the choice presented to her was a false one. Women in medicine today don't make the same sacrifices she did, and watching them succeed as both doctors and parents forces her to confront her mistakes." We talked for over an hour, Sarah sharing stories about my mother I had never heard. Her vulnerability during difficult cases, private doubts. She never showed the world moments of genuine compassion with patients that contradicted the cold persona she brought home. It didn't excuse her behavior, but it painted a more complex portrait than the simply neglectful mother I had grown up with. As we finished our wine, my phone vibrated with a text message notification. I glanced down and felt my heart jump when I saw my mother's name on the screen, a rare occurrence in itself. "We need to talk. Can you come to the house? I'll be home in an hour." Sarah saw my expression change. "Margaret," I nodded, showing her the message. "Will you go?" she asked. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to check out of my hotel and fly home tonight. Sarah reached across the table, briefly touching my hand. Whatever you decide is valid. But if there's any part of you that wants resolution rather than just escape, this might be your only opportunity. Margaret Fisher doesn't often admit she needs conversations she can't control. After parting ways with Sarah, I walked alone through the public garden, weighing my options. The practical choice would be to return to Chicago, to James, to my studio, and the life I had built. Yet something pulled me toward that house in Brookline. Not hope for reconciliation exactly, but a desire for completion. A final conversation that might allow me to fully release the past rather than just turn away from it. At 11:30 p.m., I found myself in an Uber heading to my childhood home, unsure what awaited me, but certain that whatever happened, I would face it as the woman I had become, not the child who had once desperately sought approval that never came. The house looked exactly as I remembered, stately, impeccably maintained, and somehow forbidding despite its elegant architecture. The garden lights illuminated the stone pathway to the front door, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. As the Uber pulled away, I stood for a moment just taking in the sight of the place where I'd grown up, but never felt I truly belonged. My key still worked, a minor surprise given my mother's meticulous attention to security. The foyer light was on, but the rest of the house lay in shadow. I called out softly, "Mom!" "In the study," came her voice, lacking its usual authoritative tone. I made my way through the familiar hallway past family portraits that documented my growth, but somehow failed to capture any genuine warmth between us. The study door was ajar, warm light spilling onto the hallway floor. When I entered, I found my mother sitting not at her imposing desk, but in one of two leather armchairs positioned near the fireplace. She had changed out of her elegant gown into simple slacks and a cashmere sweater. Without her professional armor, she looked older, smaller somehow. The Crystal Retirement Award sat on the desk, the gift box I had given her unopened beside it. She looked up as I entered, and for a brief moment I caught something unfamiliar in her expression. Uncertainty, perhaps, even vulnerability. "You came," she said simply. I did. I remained standing just inside the doorway. She gestured to the other armchair. "Please sit. Would you like something to drink? There's wine, or I could make tea." "I'm fine," I said, moving to the chair but perching on its edge, not allowing myself to settle in completely. "What did you want to talk about?" She folded her hands in her lap, a gesture I recognized from childhood, her way of composing herself before difficult conversations. What happened tonight was inappropriate. The seating arrangements, that wasn't how it was supposed to be. I raised an eyebrow but remained silent. "The original plan included family at one of the front tables," she continued. "But as RSVPs came in from hospital board members and research partners, the event coordinator asked for adjustments. I should have insisted on keeping your seat in the main room. But you didn't," I stated, not accusingly but as a simple fact. She met my gaze directly for perhaps the first time that night. "No, I didn't. And it wasn't about Space Leah. It was about fear. Fear." This wasn't the direction I had expected the conversation to take. My mother stood abruptly, moving to the window that overlooked the back garden. With her back to me, words seemed to come more easily. Tonight wasn't just about celebrating my career. It was about establishing my legacy, how I'll be remembered in medical circles after I'm gone. She paused. "Having you there in that room full of colleagues who have only ever seen me as the consummate professional, I was afraid they would see the truth." "What truth?" I asked, genuinely confused. She turned back to face me, and I was shocked to see her eyes glistening. In 34 years, I had never seen my mother cry. That I failed completely at the most important role I ever had. That while I was saving strangers' lives, I was losing my own daughter. The silence that followed felt heavy with decades of unspoken truths. I know what kind of mother I've been, Leah. Or rather, what kind I haven't been. I told myself it was necessary, that the work I did was too important to divide my attention, that you would understand someday. She gave a small, bitter laugh. But watching you walk into that ballroom tonight, seeing the accomplished woman you've become despite my neglect rather than because of my support, I realize there's no professional achievement that could compensate for what I've missed. I sat perfectly still, afraid that any reaction might cause her to retreat back behind her professional facade. This was a side of my mother I had never seen. Raw, unguarded, admitting failure. "Why did you send me an invitation?" I asked. "If you were going to seat me in the hallway, why include me at all?" She returned to her chair, sinking into it with unusual heaviness. "I wanted you there. I truly did. But when the moment came to introduce you to that world, my world, I panicked. These were people who had known me for decades as the surgeon who never let personal matters interfere with work. How could I suddenly present a daughter they barely knew existed? What would they think of me as a professional if they realized what I'd sacrificed to maintain that image? So you hid me away," I said, the hurt resurfacing despite my determination to remain detached. "Yes." She didn't try to soften it with excuses. "And then you refused to stay hidden, and do you know what happened? Not one of my colleagues thought less of my professional accomplishments. Instead, they questioned my humanity. The very people I'd been trying to impress for decades looked at me tonight with disappointment, not because I had a daughter, but because of how I treated her." She reached for the gift box on the desk, running her fingers along the elegant wrapping. "May I open this now?" I nodded, watching as she carefully removed the paper and lifted the lid. Her breath caught when she saw the Cartier watch nestled in its velvet interior. She lifted it, turning it over to read the engraving, "To New Beginnings. Congratulations, Mom. Love, Leah." "It's beautiful," she said softly. "Much more than I deserve." "It wasn't about deserving," I replied. "It was about hoping." She slipped the watch onto her wrist, adjusting the band. "Is it too late for that hope?" The question hung between us. Sincere, fearful, and entirely unprecedented from a woman who had never before expressed doubt about anything. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I didn't come to Boston expecting reconciliation. I'm not even sure what that would look like between us." "Neither do I," she admitted. "I've never been good at personal relationships. Even before you were born, I kept people at a distance. It seemed safer." "Safer than what?" "Safer than caring too much. Safer than the vulnerability of needing someone." She looked down at the watch. "Medicine was predictable. Follow the procedures. Maintain professional distance, and success was measurable. Being a mother, there's no protocol for that. No guaranteed outcomes." For the first time, I saw my mother as something other than the callous, career-obsessed woman who had prioritized her professional achievements above all else. I saw someone who had built walls not out of coldness, but out of fear. Fear of failing at the one role that couldn't be mastered through study and practice. "I can't promise an instant relationship," I said carefully. "Too much has happened, or not happened, between us. But I'm willing to try something new. Small steps." "What would that look like?" she asked, and I was struck by how strange it was to hear my decisive, authoritative mother asking for guidance. "Phone calls. Real ones, not just obligatory holiday check-ins. Maybe visits occasionally. Getting to know each other as the adults we are now, not just carrying forward the roles we had when I was growing up." She nodded, a cautious optimism in her expression that I had rarely seen directed at me. "I'd like that. And Leah, I am proud of you. Not in the abstract way I used to mention to colleagues, but genuinely impressed by the woman you've become. Your strength, your talent, your ability to build a life that reflects who you truly are. Those are achievements more meaningful than any medical breakthrough I've been part of." We talked for another hour, not solving decades of hurt in a single conversation, but establishing a foundation for whatever might come next. When I finally left, declining her offer to stay in my old room and opting to return to my hotel, she walked me to the door. In an awkward but genuine gesture, she hugged me briefly. "The watch," she said, touching its face. "I'll look at it every day and remember this conversation." "That's what new beginnings are for," I replied. "Not to erase the past, but to start writing a different future. As my second Uber of the night pulled away from the house, I felt neither the elation of perfect reconciliation nor the ache of renewed rejection. Instead, I felt something more valuable, the steady calm of having finally been seen not as an extension of my mother's reputation or a disappointment to her expectations, but as Leah, a woman worthy of knowing on her own terms. The flight back to Chicago the next day gave me time to process everything that had happened. Watching the clouds below, I thought about the conversations with Sarah and my mother, turning them over in my mind like smooth stones, examining each perspective, each revelation. By the time the plane touched down at O'Hare, I had reached a kind of peace, not the clean resolution of a fairy tale ending, but the messy, tentative peace that comes with honest confrontation and the first steps toward change. James was waiting at the airport, his familiar face a welcome sight after the emotional turbulence of Boston. He wrapped me in a warm embrace, then held me at arm's length, studying my expression. "You look different," he said. "Not sad exactly, but changed." "I feel changed," I admitted as we walked to his car. "It's like I've been carrying this weight for so long I didn't even notice it anymore. And now it's not completely gone, but lighter somehow." During the drive home, I recounted everything. The humiliation of the hallway seat, the confrontation in the ballroom, Sarah's insights, and finally the unexpected vulnerability my mother had shown in our late-night conversation. James listened without interrupting, occasionally reaching over to squeeze my hand at particularly difficult moments in the story. "So what happens now?" he asked as we pulled up to our apartment building. "I'm not sure," I said honestly. "We're going to try talking regularly. Actually talking, not just exchanging information. She mentioned wanting to visit Chicago to see my studio. And you're okay with that?" I considered the question carefully. "I think so. Not because I'm expecting her to suddenly become the mother I always wanted, but because I'm no longer expecting anything specific from her. Whatever relationship we build now will be between two adults who choose it, not a child desperately seeking approval and a mother withholding it." Over the following weeks, this new dynamic began taking shape. Our first phone call was stiff and awkward, both of us unsure how to navigate conversation without our established patterns of distance and disappointment. But gradually, call by call, something shifted. My mother asked questions about my design work, not perfunctory inquiries, but specific questions that showed she had researched my field to better understand what I did. I found myself genuinely curious about her transition to retirement, about what she was reading and thinking now that her identity wasn't solely defined by her surgical career. 3 weeks after returning from Boston, I started writing about our relationship. Not for publication, or even to share with my mother, but as a way to process decades of complicated emotions. Each evening I would sit at my desk overlooking Chicago's skyline and write about specific memories, both painful ones like missed birthdays and performances, and the rare positive moments when my mother had shown glimpses of connection. The writing became a form of therapy, allowing me to acknowledge hurts without letting them define me. I also began attending a support group for adult children of emotionally distant parents. The first meeting was intimidating, sitting in a circle of strangers, each carrying their own versions of parental wounds. But as I listened to their stories, I recognized patterns that transcended our individual experiences. The constant striving for validation, the persistent feeling of inadequacy, the exhausting performance of achievement that never seemed enough. Sharing my own story in this space was unexpectedly healing. There was something powerful about being truly understood by people who had lived similar experiences. They didn't minimize my pain with platitudes about my mother's good intentions, nor did they demonize her as irredeemably selfish. Instead, they offered the simple gift of recognition. Yes, this happened to you, and it was wrong and it shaped you, but it doesn't have to control your future. As spring turned to summer, I noticed other changes in myself. I became more assertive about boundaries in all my relationships. I stopped taking on client projects that didn't align with my creative vision, just to prove my worth. I began saying no without extensive explanations or apologies. Most significantly, I stopped measuring my success against external validation and started asking myself what actually brought me fulfillment. My relationship with James deepened through this process. Watching me confront my past and reshape my understanding of myself, he showed a patience and support that contrasted sharply with the conditional approval I'd grown up with. We began talking more seriously about our future, not just vague some days, but concrete plans for building a life together. 2 months after the retirement ceremony, my mother visited Chicago as promised. I showed her my studio, introduced her to my team, and watched with a complex mix of emotions as she engaged with my professional world with genuine interest. There were still awkward moments, old patterns that threatened to resurface, but we navigated them with a new awareness that hadn't existed before. During dinner at a restaurant overlooking Lake Michigan, she asked a question that caught me off guard. "Are you happy, Leah, with your life, your work, your relationships?" In the past, such a question from her would have felt like a test, an opportunity to perform contentment for her approval. This time I took a moment to consider my honest answer. "Yes," I said finally. Not because everything is perfect, but because I've stopped waiting for perfection to allow myself to feel fulfilled. I love my work. I have people in my life who value me for who I am, rather than what I achieve, and I'm learning to recognize my own worth without external validation. She nodded slowly, turning her wine glass in her fingers. She was wearing the watch I had given her. "That's a kind of success I never achieved," she admitted. "I accumulated accolades, publications, professional respect, but I was always reaching for the next achievement, never feeling it was enough." She looked directly at me. "I don't want that for you." "I know," I said. And for the first time, I truly believed that she wanted my happiness more than she wanted me to follow her predetermined path to success. As summer turned to fall, our communications found a new rhythm. Not the close-knit daily exchanges some mothers and daughters share, but regular, meaningful conversations that acknowledged our separate lives while maintaining connection. We didn't try to erase the past or pretend the decades of emotional distance hadn't happened. Instead, we built something new around the reality of our history, an adult relationship based on choice rather than obligation. The most profound change, however, wasn't in my relationship with my mother, but in my relationship with myself. I no longer defined my worth through her eyes or anyone else's. The little girl who had studied until her eyes burned desperate for a nod of approval had finally grown into a woman who could stand in her own light. That hallway chair at the retirement ceremony, intended as a symbol of my exclusion, had instead become the catalyst for my final liberation from the need for external validation. Sometimes our greatest moments of clarity come precisely when others try to make us invisible. Being seated alone in that hallway showed me with perfect clarity that I would never again accept being placed on the periphery of anyone's life, including my own. Have you ever been made to feel invisible by the very people who should see you most clearly? The journey from that pain to self-acceptance isn't quick or easy, but it's worth every step. If my story resonated with you, please share your experience in the comments below.